Hey everyone, in this video I would like to talk about and read a little bit from a recent article published in the journal Theory and Psychology titled Disquieting Experiences and Conversation. The author of this article is Professor Lívia Mathias Simão, and the article was published in 2020. I leave a link to the article below. Disquieting experiences, according to Simão, are inseparable from human life to the extent that we continually try to learn more about ourselves, learn more about other people, and also learn about the shared reality, the world that we share in common. So we are continually acting, and these actions are related to our knowledge. We act based on what we believe, and we verify or fail to verify our beliefs. And we also enact our desires to know. So we enact our questions. These actions take place against some background, and that background could feel to us as stable, safe, secure, or it could feel relatively unstable. It's that background, the background of those actions, those inactions of belief and desire to know, it is that in that background that we might face disquiet. So the terms quiet and disquiet are, I think, very useful, very effective, in part because they direct our attention to the background of experience. So in a conversation, for example, we can experience disquiet if you describe a conversation you had as disquieting, uncomfortable, awkward. You are referring to generally the background of that conversation, which is to say, we cannot necessarily find the signs of disquiet if we look just at the words, at the transcribed conversation, if you just look at the content of what you say, because it is in that subjective experience that you have access to that we find disquiet or comfort or whatever that is, that background element is. Drawing on another psychologist's work, John Schotter, drawing on John Schotter's work, Simão refers to that conversational background in terms of a third party. So if you and I are having a conversation, it is not just you and I that are involved in this exchange. We also must have a third party, a so-called third party, a shared reference point, a point of reference, like some cultural mutual understanding, some linguistic understanding in common that enables our exchange, enables our conversation. If you are familiar a little bit with Jacques Lacan's work and terminology, you can also link this third party to the big other of Jacques Lacan. We might get to that at a later point. So this reference to the shared point of reference, a background of a conversation, of experience is crucial here. Okay, now let's get to reading a few passages from Simão's article. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, to read the full article, because obviously I've selected a very small part of the article to read with you, and this selection reflects my own interest and my own bias. So if you're interested, check out the article. The first group of quotes or excerpts that I will be reading are about the assumptions. What is it that we assume, that we must assume before we approach the topic of disquiet? So let's read. Given the different phenomenological worlds of I and of other, there must be an effort from I and from other in the quest for intersubjectivity. So relatively straightforward. Given that my experience doesn't perfectly match your experience, it requires effort for us to link our subjective experiences and achieve intersubjectivity. Next, the privilege of speech comes in tandem with the responsibility of making oneself clear and with the burden of possibly perceiving oneself as misunderstood. Rometveit calls this epistemic responsibility, the responsibility to construct and provide sense to a state of affairs, bringing it to the conversation through language, and being responsible for the perspectives intersubjectively assumed in that respect. The next passage is about knowing and knowledge and what is involved in person knowing something. So from the present perspective, quote, knowledge does not entail knowledge about the things perceived by the person as outside them, outside the person, but concerns and perhaps mainly the knowledge about oneself in relation with one's world, which implies the quest for others' knowledge. All right, so those are about the assumptions, what we are presupposing that enables us to approach the topic of disquieting experience and conversations. Now let's get to the definition. And Simão has already defined disquieting experiences in previous work. So now she is citing her own work in this passage. I called disquieting experience the experience that hurts expectations, that instigates affectively and cognitively, either the actor who experiences it or another person who experiences the actor's disquieting through dialogue. So it could be a vicarious experience of disquiet. Therefore, the disquieting experience may happen both in the intrapersonal or interpersonal ambit and usually occurs concomitantly in both. Next, when the gap between the aimed and present systems of values surpasses the limit of tolerance, breaking the dialogic relationship between consistency and inconsistency, the disquieting experience emerges. This is because the rupture of the dialogic relation between consistency and inconsistency generates an undifferentiation in what was so far a field of relational sense between the should value and is value systems. Instead of a field of meaning marked by the dialogic relation, the nonsense that characterizes the disquieting experiences emerges. End quote. So this passage expresses this idea that disquieting experiences is different. They are different from a surprise, from the things that we don't know, because there can be a relatively comfortable exchange between the familiar and the unfamiliar, between what we know and what we don't know, what we want to know. So if my friend and I are having a conversation about things that I'm asking about from my friend, and my friend is giving me information that is not disquieting. What makes that disquieting is that the gap between the known and unknown gets to a point that is not tolerable anymore. The parameters, the difference between what is familiar and what is unfamiliar, the exchange, the dialogic relationship between familiar and unfamiliar takes a different character that is itself unstable. So it is a character of the totality of the exchange, the totality of the dialogue. Let's read a bit more to clarify this. The person who has a disquieting experience will seek a new relational unity between the expected and what happened, not only with respect to a knowledge about the world outside of them, but principally regarding their own potentiality to understand themselves in relation to it. So it is a disquieting experience is disquieting because it feels as if the person, the knowing subject, the knowing person, is standing on shaky grounds and cannot navigate this conversation anymore in a predictable way. Next, due to being experienced in the ambit of subjectivity, the disquieting experiences are feelings regarding subjective experiences that touch the person affectively and pre-reflexively. As such, they are lived in the first person. This implies that they cannot be translated into an objective or third person account, a third person description that get guarantee. If you have these elements in the experience, if you have these objective descriptions met, then you can be sure that you're dealing with a disquieting experience. Okay, now let me give some examples, the help of 3 examples to clarify. Unfortunately, Professor Simão's article didn't have helpful extensive examples. But yesterday, I had an experience while I was walking back from the grocery store that could be described as very disquieting. So what I saw was, on my way, while I was walking on the sidewalk, I passed by a homeless person who was sitting on the sidewalk, and when I looked more closely, she was writing. She was writing in her diary, and when I looked, I noticed at the top of the page, she had written the date. She had written, what is the date yesterday? October 9th, 2021. And the way she had that date at the top of the page was exactly the way I would write in my journals. I write the date like that at the top of the page, at the top right corner, and then I would underline the date. I would just draw a line under the date, and then I would start writing the entry for that day. And seeing her in that state, seeing her writing in her diary, and seeing her being homeless was unsettling, because it was like seeing myself. It was that, for me, the act of writing in a diary is something that I consider a very personal and very defining character of me, who I am, a very defining practice, a very significant life practice that I have. And to see that in someone who ordinarily should be identified as very different. We tend to see homeless people as inhabiting a different world. But seeing someone in that position, like me, she was me in that moment, pre-reflexively, like Simão writes, pre-reflexively, I saw myself there. And not only did I saw myself in her, I also saw the potential in me to be there, to be on the sidewalk, to be homeless. So that's one. You can see how this links with what she writes in one of the passages that we read together, that it is not about knowing things about the world, it is about knowing things about yourself in relation to that world. So the self kind of is dragged in to the experience in a way that is unsettling, in a way that is disquieting. If the self is not involved, then we don't have probably a disquieting experience. The second example is when I saw a few days ago, I shared on Facebook that I had left academia, that I had resigned from my tenure track position. And I thought, I'm curious how people would react. And I wanted to openly just mention it, talk about it. I didn't mean it to be positive or negative. It was just a matter of fact. And it was a Facebook update, Facebook updates. But what I noticed was several academics congratulated me. They said, congratulations, good luck with everything. And this was also disquieting in a different way, in a milder way compared to the previous example. Because what I was referring to was a semi-traumatic experience. This is a major life transition. Imagine having invested in a career, a kind of life, a plan for life for 15 years or so, and then getting out of it all of a sudden. It's not a comfortable experience. It's a kind of life transition that is disorienting. And when people just congratulate you, it seems very inappropriate. That's okay. I mean, I wouldn't have felt what it's like to be in this position without actually going through it. And I think by kind of dealing with my experience in that way, by saying congratulations, by framing it in a positive way, this positive framing is very characteristic of Facebook. In everything, you have to frame everything in terms of as much as possible in a very unambiguously positive way. And it's also characteristic of academics. They also constantly are positive, and they repress the negative aspect. Very systematically, predictably, they repress the negative side, which is related to my reason for leaving academia. So I think that's also a coping mechanism for people who to deal with my statement, because it becomes more manageable for them the moment they say, congrats, it's like, from my end, what do you mean? Why congrats? But from there, it's like, yeah, I put your statement in a box, and it's clear for me now. It's quiet now. It is not disquieting. The third example that Professor Simão refers to very briefly in her article is in the conversations that we have. I had this kind of conversations. I'm sure it's a common thing that we encounter. Imagine that you are talking with someone and you totally are, you're being nice, you're being a decent person, and you're following the norms of a typical interaction between two people. Like, let's say you're following the norms of a small talk. Is the weekend just passed? You see your colleague on a Monday, and you ask your colleague how their weekend was, and they suddenly say something or do something that is out of the ordinary. They refuse to adhere to the norms, to the social norms. For example, they are not polite. They don't give you a polite response. Or they break down and they start crying. Or they get into deep detail about how unhappy they are in their intimate relationships. Now, that is another example of a disquieting experience, because you don't know what to do in that situation. The discrepancy between what is familiar, what was expected, and what you were expecting to hear, the actual state of affair, and how you think things should be, how things should go, that discrepancy is suddenly too uncomfortable, and you're not no longer in a dialogic relationship between the known and the unknown, but it's more like an undifferentiated mass of nonsense. That's how it feels anyways, according to, if you keep the terminology that Simão uses here. It's that clear-cut distinction between known and unknown, familiar and unfamiliar, turns into an undifferentiated mass of nonsense. All right, let's stop here. This is a very interesting topic. As I said, I would encourage you to read the article if you're interested. And I might continue talking about this. If you relate to this topic, if you have disquieting, if you have recently had experiences of this kind, experiences that could be described as disquieting, if you can share what kind of experiences they were, please share them in the comments below. If you have any questions or comments in general related to this, let me know. If you like to read, to listen about this topic. If you'd like me to talk more about this topic in future videos, also let me know. Otherwise, I'll continue in the future videos. Thank you.